Do you need some water? Because I think your pants are on fire. The room goes still the second those words land. Cameras keep rolling. Staffers stop moving. And one county sheriff sits there, staring straight ahead, as a United States senator accuses him of something far bigger than a bad answer. He is accusing him of saying one thing to the public and doing another when public safety is on the line. This is not some dry policy hearing buried in the middle of a workday. This feels personal. It feels explosive. And before it is over, the questions on the table are not just about immigration. They are about truth, responsibility, and whether a dangerous man should ever have walked back out onto the street. Because here is the part that hits ordinary people in the gut. The senator is not talking about paperwork in the abstract. He is talking about a man he describes as being in the country illegally, tied to a gang, convicted of manslaughter in Mexico, and later sitting in a local jail after being arrested in a domestic violence case involving a woman. Federal officers, the senator says, want that man held so they can take custody of him. The sheriff does not hold him. The sheriff says he follows a judge's release order. And suddenly one simple question tears through the room. When the system says release him, but danger still hangs in the air, who is supposed to step in? That is the reason nobody can look away from this exchange. It is not really about a single quote or a single argument. It is about whether the people trusted to keep families safe are working together or working against each other. It is about whether old promises made during a campaign still shape decisions years later. And it is about whether the public is hearing the full truth from the man wearing the badge. The sheriff says he believes in secure borders. He says he believes anyone who breaks the law should face consequences. The senator hears that and immediately starts digging through the past. Because if those words are true now, what exactly did the sheriff mean when he said something very different before? The sheriff at the center of this storm is the elected lawman of Durham County. He is not sitting there as a commentator. He is the man in charge of the county jail, the man expected to protect the public, the man whose office becomes the bridge between arrests, court orders, releases, and the quiet fears of people who just want to know dangerous individuals are not slipping through the cracks. To supporters, he may look like a leader trying to balance fairness with order. To critics, he may look like a man whose politics make him hesitate when federal immigration officers come calling. Either way, he is now under bright lights, and every answer matters. Across from him sits the senator, sharp, relentless, and clearly in no mood to let a polished answer pass without a fight. He does not meander. He does not soften the edges. He asks whether protecting the public is part of the sheriff's job. The sheriff says yes. He asks whether the sheriff thinks vetting people at the border is racist. The sheriff says no. He asks whether the sheriff thinks people should be able to violate federal immigration laws without consequences. Again, the sheriff says no. On the surface, those answers sound simple, clean, responsible. But the senator is not asking those questions because he needs the answers. He is laying a trap. Then come the human lives at the center of the hearing, the people who never get the comfort of distance. There is the woman in the domestic violence case, reduced in the hearing to an example, but very real all the same. There is the public, the families who hear words like gang, manslaughter, assault, and illegal entry and think about their own neighborhoods. There are federal officers who expect cooperation from local jails when a release is coming. There is a judge whose release order becomes a shield in the sheriff's defense. And there is Carlos Heriberto Mendoza Martinez, the name that changes the temperature in the room. Once that name is spoken, the hearing stops feeling theoretical. It starts feeling dangerous. What makes this matter to ordinary people is not the politics of it. It is the fear of what happens when one hand of government says, "Let him go," and another says, "Hold him long enough for us to take him." Most people do not care about agency turf wars. They care about outcomes. They care about whether someone violent ends up back on the street. They care about whether their leaders sound honest when they explain how and why that happened. And that is exactly why this exchange becomes so tense. The sheriff is no longer just defending policy. He is defending his judgment, his credibility, and the very idea that he takes public safety seriously. But here is where it gets complicated. This fight does not begin in that hearing room. It begins years earlier, during an election. Back in 2018, when the sheriff is running for office, he makes a statement that will come back to haunt him. The senator reads it aloud, carefully, deliberately, word for word. In that earlier interview, The future sheriff says he disagrees with the previous sheriff's cooperation with IC. He says he will make a clear and uncompromising commitment not to cooperate with IC. He says he will not honor IC detainers. He says his office will not participate in IC roundups. The sheriff does not deny saying it. He looks at the statement and answers plainly, "Yes, sir." That single moment changes everything, because now the hearing is no longer about what the sheriff says he believes today. It is about whether his record already tells the real story. Campaign words matter. They reveal priorities. They reveal instincts. They reveal what kind of pressure a person feels from the people who put them in office. And when those words are as strong, as clear, and uncompromising, they are not easy to explain away later. The senator knows that. He is not just reading old quotes for effect. He is suggesting that those promises are still alive inside the sheriff's decisions, even if the sheriff now wraps them in more careful language. The sheriff tries to hold steady. He says secure borders are important. He says there are proper processes for coming into the country. He says anyone who breaks federal or state law should be held accountable. He says he cooperates with federal authorities and would cooperate with ICE if they would cooperate with him. That sounds measured. It sounds balanced. But the senator is chasing something else entirely. He wants a straight line from the campaign trail to the jailhouse door. He wants to show that the sheriff's public image of responsibility cannot be trusted because the sheriff has already told the world where he stands. And there is another quote waiting in the wings. Another line from another interview. Another moment where the sheriff's own words come back like a witness for the prosecution. This time it is about what happens when someone in the jail is about to be released and an immigration hold is close to expiring. The senator reads the sheriff's words again. He says ICE officials asked whether the sheriff would call them and let them know. The answer, according to that interview, is no. No, because that is not what the law says. No, I will not call ICE. End of quote. Again, the sheriff does not deny the quote. Again, he says yes, those words were read correctly. Now the sheriff adds context. He says that statement came before a new state law. He says that under the law now, his office makes that second phone call. He says ICE is notified whenever someone enters the jail process. That is his explanation. That is his defense. It is not that he hates immigration laws. It is that the rules changed, and he follows the rules as they exist. That may sound reasonable to some people listening, but to the senator, it sounds like the answer of a man trying to escape his own record. And that is when the hearing moves from sharp to savage. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The senator does not argue in technical language. He argues in moral language. He is trying to make the audience feel that this is obvious, that this is common sense, that no one who truly values public safety would risk releasing someone the senator describes in such dark and alarming terms. The sheriff, by contrast, keeps retreating to process, to what the judge orders, to what the law requires, to what the jail can and cannot do. And that clash is the beating heart of the whole confrontation. One man is speaking in outrage. The other is speaking in procedure. One sounds like anger. The other sounds like a system manual. And in a moment like this, calm can look composed, or it can look cold. Then the name is spoken again. Carlos Heriberto Mendoza Martinez. The senator says the sheriff should remember him. He says this man is in the country illegally from Mexico. He says he belongs to a street gang. He says he has a manslaughter conviction in Mexico. He says that in 2021 and 2024 the man is arrested for assaulting a woman in a domestic violence case. He says ICE places a detainer on him, a federal request asking the jail to hold him a little longer so immigration officers can come pick him up. And he says the sheriff refuses to honor it. In that moment, the hearing stops circling the issue and lands directly on it. The sheriff does not admit what the senator wants him to admit. He says he cannot say he did not honor the detainer. He says what he did honor were the conditions of release issued by a judge. He says he is a custodian. He says he does not determine who is released or held. He says he follows the court's order. That is a careful answer. It is also an answer that immediately runs into a wall. Because to the senator, it sounds like excuse-making. It sounds like a sheriff hiding behind paperwork while a dangerous man walks free. This is where the deeper story comes into view. A local judge can order release under certain conditions. A county sheriff can say his hands are tied because he is not the one deciding guilt, punishment, or release in the big picture sense. Federal immigration officers can say they still want custody, and need a local jail to give them that chance. All of that can be true at the same time. And when those systems collide, the people watching from outside do not see layers. They see one outcome. Was the man held, or was he not? Was the public protected, or was it not? That is the brutal simplicity of public judgment. The senator hears the sheriff's explanation and seems almost insulted by it. He asks if the sheriff really believes in public safety. The sheriff answers, "Yes, sir, I do." But the senator is not done. He turns the question into an accusation. He says the sheriff would allow someone in the country illegally, convicted of manslaughter, facing domestic violence accusations, to be in his jail while ICE asks, "Please hold him when his time is up. We want to get this criminal out of our country." And according to the senator, the sheriff says no. It is a devastating picture. Not subtle, not balanced. Devastating by design. The sheriff keeps returning to the same point. ICE is notified. The judge issues the release. The sheriff follows the court's order. In his telling, he is not setting anyone loose out of personal belief. He is carrying out the limits of his office. But here is why the answer struggles to calm the storm. The senator is not really asking what the sheriff is technically allowed to do. He is asking what kind of man he is, what kind of instincts he has, what kind of choices he makes when public safety and immigration enforcement collide. And on that level, old quotes hurt far more than present explanations help. Keep watching. This is where everything starts to unravel. Because once those older statements are in the record, every present-day answer sounds different. When the sheriff says he believes in accountability, the senator hears contradiction. When the sheriff says he cooperates with federal authorities, the senator hears revision. When the sheriff says he follows the law, the senator hears someone who only changes course when the law forces him to. That is why the hearing becomes so tense. The facts are no longer arriving one by one. They are stacking. Campaign promise, interview quote, detainer dispute, high-risk defendant, domestic violence allegation, release order, and then, hanging over all of it, the question of whether the sheriff's instincts ever truly align with the duty he claims to honor. The atmosphere in the room shifts with every exchange. You can almost feel the sheriff trying to keep his tone even, trying not to match the senator's fury beat for beat. That in itself is revealing. Some viewers will see discipline, others will see discomfort. The senator, meanwhile, keeps pushing harder, as if he senses that the more personal he makes it, the more the hearing becomes a public referendum on trust. He is not content to show disagreement. He wants moral clarity. He wants the audience to walk away believing the sheriff is not merely mistaken, but shamefully wrong. And then comes one of the most brutal lines in the entire exchange. "I don't mean any disrespect, but you ought to be ashamed." It lands like a verdict before any verdict exists. The senator does not just reject the sheriff's explanation. He rejects the sheriff's conscience. He asks how the sheriff can possibly claim to be for public safety if he hates immigration laws so much that he would let what he calls a convicted murderer back on the street. The sheriff tries to answer. He says it is not a matter of hating immigration law, but the senator cuts him off with a line that hits like a slap. "You could have fooled me, Sheriff." That is the moment the hearing stops being an argument and becomes a spectacle. Not because the facts suddenly change, but because the emotion becomes impossible to ignore. The sheriff is no longer debating a policy difference. He is defending himself against the idea that he has betrayed the very mission of his office. And the audience is no longer simply hearing testimony. They are watching a public shaming unfold in real time. Nobody in that room is prepared for what that does to the energy. Once a line like that is spoken, there is no easy path back to calm. But the most explosive part of all may be what is left unsaid. The sheriff never offers a passionate defense of the release in human terms. He does not say the public should not worry. He does not say the woman in the domestic violence case deserved stronger protection and his office did everything possible. He does not say the federal officers dropped the ball in detail. He keeps it narrow. The judge ordered release. ICE was notified. I am a custodian. That is his shield. Yet shields can protect, and they can also expose. Because when pain and fear are part of the story, a technical defense can sound painfully thin. And this is where the larger emotional backstory crashes into the present. Domestic violence is never just a line in a hearing. Behind those words is a woman, fear, trauma, a moment where someone may have needed the system to work the first time, not after a second chance, not after another arrest, not after another debate. Then add the senator's description of gang ties and a manslaughter conviction from Mexico, and the picture becomes even darker. Whether every label carries equal legal weight in every setting is not the point for the audience. The point is what kind of risk is being described. The point is why anyone would gamble with it at all. The sheriff, in fairness, is defending a role that often exists inside strict boundaries. A jailer is not a king. A sheriff cannot simply invent powers because a case feels alarming. Judges issue orders. Laws define authority. State rules change over time. Federal requests do not always work the way the public imagines they do. All of that matters. But here's the hard truth. Once people believe a leader's instincts pull in the wrong direction, those boundaries stop sounding like safeguards and start sounding like excuses. That is the danger of the sheriff's earlier words. They poison every later explanation. And then, silence. Not literal silence. The hearing continues. People keep speaking. But emotionally, there is a silence after that "pants are on fire" line, and another after "you ought to be ashamed," where the room seems to realize this has gone past policy and straight into character. Those are the turning points. Those are the moments when the audience stops wondering who is winning the exchange and starts wondering what this says about the whole system. A sheriff says he follows the law. A senator says he is hiding behind it. Somewhere between those two claims is a truth the public desperately wants to find. The pace of the hearing slows right there, at least emotionally. The sheriff tries once more to explain. ICE is notified. The judge issues release. I follow the court's order. One sentence at a time. Measured. Controlled. The senator's answer is just as simple. You hate immigration laws. You let him go. You should be ashamed. One sentence at a time. Sharp. Final. The contrast could not be clearer. One man is trying to survive the facts. The other is trying to define them. And in public life, the person who defines the story often wins long before any official outcome arrives. Don't go anywhere. The biggest moment is still coming. Because in a hearing like this, the closest thing to closing arguments does not come from a judge or a jury. It comes from the final emotional push each side makes when time is running out. The senator's closing case is devastatingly simple. A dangerous man is in the jail. Federal officers want him. The sheriff has a history of opposing cooperation with ICE. The man is released. Therefore, the sheriff's politics matter more to him than public safety. That is the senator's story. It is forceful because it sounds easy to understand. No legal maze. No technical detours. Just a chain of cause and effect. The sheriff's final stand is very different. He does not try to out-dramatize the senator. He tries to narrow the frame. He says he follows the judge's order. He says ICE gets notice. He says the law has changed and his office now makes the required call. He does not sound like a man trying to make a grand speech. He sounds like a man trying to stop a wildfire with a bucket. And that may be the problem. When the room is burning with outrage, process can sound painfully small. Still, that is his defense. Not that the concern is fake. Not that the case is irrelevant. Only that his office acts within the limits set before it. And that brings us to the hearing's version of a verdict. There is no foreperson standing up. No dramatic reading of guilty or not guilty. No judge lifting a gavel and declaring the matter closed. But make no mistake, a verdict does arrive. It arrives in the senator's final words and in the impression left hanging over the room. The sheriff is not formally convicted of anything in that exchange. Yet publicly, politically, emotionally, he is placed on trial and judged in real time. For many viewers, the sentence is already spoken the moment the senator says, "You could have fooled me, Sheriff." That reputational verdict matters because it shapes how every future answer from the sheriff will be heard. If the public believes he bends away from immigration enforcement on instinct, then every explanation about judges and procedure will carry less weight. If they believe he is simply following the law as written, then the senator's performance may look like political theater. But in the moment itself, inside that room, the emotional impact is unmistakable. The sheriff is cornered. The senator is in command. And the case of Carlos Heriberto Mendoza Martinez becomes the symbol through which a much larger battle is fought. Outside a hearing like this, the reaction is never limited to the people in the room. Families watching hear something different depending on what scares them most. Some hear a warning that dangerous men are being released because local officials refuse to fully cooperate, with federal immigration officers. Others hear a warning that elected leaders are simplifying complex legal limits to score points on television. But nearly everyone hears this much. Trust is fragile. Once people begin to suspect that public safety is being filtered through politics, every institution involved starts to lose something. And then there is the human fallout that gets buried under the argument. The woman at the center of the domestic violence case does not get the luxury of abstract debate. For victims and families in stories like this, the system is not a talking point. It is supposed to be protection. It is supposed to mean that when someone violent is flagged as dangerous, the adults in charge act like the stakes are real. That is why the senator's attack lands so hard. He is speaking not just to policy watchers, but to anyone who has ever wondered whether institutions take victims seriously enough before it is too late. What happens to the defendant at the center of the senator's example becomes part of the public hunger for answers. If ICE is notified, why is he not picked up in time? If the judge orders release, why is there no safer bridge between the courthouse and federal custody? If the sheriff's office now follows a new state rule requiring an extra call, why was the old system ever loose enough to create a confrontation like this? Those are the questions that remain after the hearing ends. And they matter because they point to something bigger than one sheriff and one senator. They point to cracks in the handoff itself. In the end, that may be the most unsettling truth revealed here. Not simply that two men disagree. Not simply that one official has old quotes he wishes were not being read back to him. But that public safety can become trapped in the space between agencies, between orders, between responsibilities, between what one office requests and another believes it must do. When that happens, the public does not feel reassured by process. The public feels exposed. And when fear enters the picture, outrage follows fast behind it. So what does this case reveal? It reveals how quickly a hearing can become a public trial. It reveals how old promises can return with stunning force when real-world consequences are attached to them. It reveals how the words, "I followed the order," can sound responsible to some and hollow to others. Most of all, it reveals how justice is not judged only by what the rules allow, but by whether people believe the truth is being faced head-on when lives may be at risk. That is why this exchange lingers long after the microphones go quiet. And now the question comes to you. When a sheriff says he is following the law, but a senator says public safety is being sacrificed, where do you land? Is this a case of a local official doing his duty within narrow limits? Or is this exactly what happens when politics gets in the way of protecting the public? Drop your verdict in the comments, because this is one of those stories where the truth depends on which part of the system you trust more. And if this case leaves you thinking the hearing could not possibly get more intense, just wait until the next one. Because the next story may make this showdown look calm,